Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. It means so much to us, to be able to do content for you guys like this. And this episode is actually kicking off our coverage and content for the 2023 to 2024 NBA season. If you missed your team's offseason, you can easily go back and watch that as we did cover all 30 NBA teams. We're looking to really level up in terms of views, quality, consistency this season, and it wouldn't be possible without each of our viewers and subscribers. So please, before we start, continue to support us by liking and subscribing. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, X, and TikTok. Yes, TikTok. We now have a TikTok, so we will be posting on there very frequently for more, content and updates.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess let's start getting into it. So, obviously this week, we've had a number of preseason games, to kind of get into. Of course, the main thing you always got to remember is that when it comes to preseason, you always got to be careful, with the takeaways you have because again, like preseason for me, usually it means something until it doesn't, right? Because like we've
Sure.
seen countless times before where like the preseason, team might look great in preseason and then doesn't do anything in the regular season. And then we have seen times where teams don't do a whole lot in the preseason and then they end up being really good. Like ideally, you'd like, the team to take it seriously if they can, or at the very least, show something in terms of process, right? I think that's kind of the main theme for preseason, usually process over results.
Sure.
Of course, you always got to have some takeaways, but again, it can be tough because it's like, we've seen in the past a lot of different things, but we're gonna probably we're not gonna do a whole detailed look at every single one, but we'll go over,
Yeah.
a fair number of the ones that we saw. So obviously the first one I guess we can start with, was the first one in Abu Dhabi, right, between the Timberwolves and the Dallas Mavericks, right? So the Timberwolves ended up winning 111-99. Edwards didn't play, but pretty much most of their other key guys did, right? Towns, Gobert, McDaniels, Conley, Nikhil Alexander Walker played in place of Edwards, right? Shake Milton, and Kyle Anderson, Nas Reed. And they looked pretty solid. I mean,
Sure.
again, the 3-point shooting wasn't necessarily amazing, but again, they got to the line a decent amount. They got a ton of rebounds. They moved the ball and spread the ball a lot. It's kind of interesting seeing Towns at the four, kind of operating with the ball in his hands a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas like Gobert is kind of like the cleanup guy. I mean, like they gave him the ball around the basket a few times, right? But
Right.
still like that's going to be one of the keys, to that combo is like what guy is going to do what, offensively, right? Because we know
Sure.
Gobert, you don't really want to, necessarily have a lot of offensive sets for him, right? Because again, like he's not really like that skilled of an offensive player. Obviously, that'll change when Edwards comes back. He did play in their other preseason game, right? And because a lot more of the offense is going to run through him. And I think that's the main thing, like for Minnesota is like they're going to go as far as Edwards can take them, right? Because I
Sure.
think he's going to go in there. I think he's going to be pretty much the engine for the team. Obviously Towns will have a role, because again, on still there's going to be a lot of nights where Towns is going to look the best. Um, but at the same time, if you are high on Minnesota this season, right, then again, you got to take stock into Edwards, right? Because again, he's the key. But obviously the other pieces around him matter as well, right? Because again, like Mike Conley, what does he look like at this point in his career, right? Because he's still the starting point guard. His
Mm-hmm.
game I think is pretty easy to fit around Edwards, because again, he doesn't need the ball a whole lot and he can shoot and he's a responsible adult. Um, but still, right? Like that is a factor, right? Is he going to be healthy? Because Minnesota did have a number of games last year where they had guys miss time. Towns missed a lot of time. Um, and then Mike Conley wasn't even a part of the team until, post trade deadline. So, there's a lot I think to like in the sense of like, I think it's fair to be higher on them than last year. Like I said, I still don't necessarily think they'll be much better, like, in terms of the final result.
Sure.
But, regardless, I think at the very least, there's reason to feel a little better about them than last year for sure, because again, it's about the health and it's about Edwards taking that step forward. So I guess, before we get into Dallas, kind of throw your thoughts
Yeah.
out there about Minnesota.
So, my thoughts on Minnesota are pretty similar to you. I really liked the fact that Towns was more, playing that traditional big man role, which I think, he has the potential to do, even though he is arguably one of the best, big man 3-point shooting bigs of all time. So I do like to see him down low, and then Rudy Gobert's more of that scrapper, Mutombo-esque kind of guy where it's like you don't need to really expect too much from him on offense, but he is there if you do need him. And then, like you said, I'm really just expecting Anthony Edwards to just really take that leap that we know that he's capable of doing. We know it's his franchise, and I think the supporting cast isn't horrible, but it's also not the best. I think it could be better, could have been better. I think given their offseason, but in general, I don't think it makes me raise any eyebrows or anything like that. But it does have me intrigued on this team. I think I'm a little bit higher than I was prior to watching them play. I think, after seeing them play a little bit, watching the highlights, I'm like, okay, now they look more like a team. And I think that might just be the guys are starting to gel together. And it seems like, Towns and Gobert may be figuring out, and, also Anthony Edwards gelling alongside them. So it should be really fun to watch Minnesota. Dallas is another story, though.
Yeah, because Dallas now, in the first game, right? They had a lineup, a starting five that I don't think they're going to use. Right? They had Derek Lively and they
Hmm.
had Olivier Maxence Prosper in the starting five. Right? Those are the two rookies they drafted. So those guys are not going to be starters.
Sure.
During the regular season. Right? It's going to probably be like Dwight Powell. Maybe Josh Green. It's not going to be those guys.
Right.
And keep in mind, like for the preseason, right? These guys only, all of them played like under 20 minutes, but for Dallas, they did have Luca play off the ball more at different times, so that was good to see because I do think even without the ball, he can still be really effective. Again, as a secondary, touch passer, or just
Hmm.
again, just as a guy that because you have to pay so much attention to him, he commands a lot of respect on the floor. Because again, like I do think like the type of offense where it's like, oh, you have this one guy run, like 90+% of your offense. I think that's a really tough ask that to work in the playoffs. But now I guess, that's kind of why you have in theory a Kyrie Irving type guy on the roster, because then
Sure.
you don't have to necessarily do that as much. Um, but again, you still have the issue of, how are they going to defend, that well? How are they going to rebound? Because they do have, a number of guys that are decent offensive players, but, again, and the reason why I don't have them in the contender status, but I do think they'll be better is again, that's the main issue is the defense. But even then they only scored 99, but like I said, it's hard to have a whole, takeaway on it because again, the guys only played like 20 minutes. In the second game, Kyrie didn't play. Um, so obviously that changes things up as well. Um, but again, like for me, I also think Dallas has too many guards, and I just feel like there's somebody is either going to have to like not play, or at some point just get traded, sometime near the deadline or something like that.
Sure.
Because again, you already have Luca and Kyrie as guards, and then you got to factor in, Jaden Hardy, right? Dante Exum, right? Green, I guess can play some more wing, right? But also like Seth Curry, Tim Hardaway, right? So you have like a number of guys that like could be in that guard spot, and I don't think
Easily.
all of them can play. In terms of in the rotation, because you're gonna need to have a, because otherwise you're gonna start playing some of those guys I think out of position. Um, but I guess kind of what are your thoughts? And I guess the other factor is the Grant Williams thing, right? Because they just
Yeah.
signed him, to a long-term deal, right? Didn't really do a whole lot necessarily on offense, but again, he's not necessarily a scorer, right? He's
Sure.
kind of more so like floor spacer as a big man, right? Kind of will take on some of those tough assignments at the forward spot, like in terms of bigger players. So I don't really expect him to score. And again, like
Right.
shooting is variant, right? He was like 2 for 7 from three in that first game, and those were the only shots he took, right? And
Right.
then second game he was like 2 for 6, but then it's like, well, if he had made one more three, he would have been 3 for 6, and it's like, that 50% sounds a lot better than 33.
Sure.
Um, but when that's most of your offensive game, obviously it's going to change like that. But either way, I think I can still see the value for him on the team. But I still, like I said, we talked about Dallas's offseason where I think they'll be better, but I still don't think that they're good enough to be in that contender mix. Even though the high end talent, right? Luca's obviously really good, and then Kyrie's pretty good. But still, I think there's still some other questions about the roster. But again, it's only preseason. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, my takeaways were the rookies, they don't look too hot. And I know that's probably an overreaction kind of thing. I get it. But at the same time, they still haven't impressed me so far. I'm sure they will down the line. So not super worried about them, but just talking about the game. Um, Defense still seems to be a very glaring issue with this team. And, you would have thought that some of their additions would have helped, especially with Grant Williams getting a multi positional defender like that. But I know one guy can't make that big of a difference and fix all your woes, but goodness gracious, it's still bad. And that honestly could put them in this play-in spot or another season where they miss the playoffs completely, just due to the fact that I'm sure they're going to have some health issues down the line. And then, like you said, it's a guard-loaded roster, and it's a lot of guards that can't really defend. So I am concerned about that.
Yeah.
But it was pretty competitive. At some points, there were times where Minnesota was up by 20 completely in the first game, and I was like, okay, this is a wash. But nonetheless, I think Dallas will be an entertaining team to watch. I think it'll just be hard to kind of gauge where they're going to finish until we get to that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because like I said, it is tough, to gauge everything for preseason. Because again, like, when you look at a lot of these teams, a lot of times, you're also looking at the new additions as well, and
Hmm.
sometimes they don't play every game, and then also like the rookies. Again, like you don't expect rookies to do a whole lot, on a team that's supposed to be good.
Sure.
Um, again, it would always be nice if they could help out. But still like a good team, generally you're not going to have a rookie play big minutes, unless guys are out due to injury. Which again, that's a factor that you brought up, right? In terms of Dallas, right? Where like say like a Kyrie could miss time, due to injury or something like that. But again, I guess that's why you have a ton of guards. But like you said, it's a lot of guards that aren't necessarily great defensively, because like Kyrie Irving, Luca, right, Hardy, Curry, right, those are all guards, but none of them are really great defenders.
Right.
They can all shoot, which is always nice. But still, like you can't necessarily only rely on that because there's gonna be games where you don't shoot that well. It doesn't matter who you have on the roster. But
I absolutely
again,
agree.
yeah, but again, the games don't necessarily count. So we got to see what happens once we get to the regular season.
Right. It
So
was
on to our
interesting to watch, though.
Yeah, exactly. So, on to our next game, right? We don't have to talk about the Dallas Timberwolves second game. We kind of did a little bit, but
Hmm.
the other game on obviously was Lakers Warriors, right? Warriors 125, Lakers 108. Um, when you look at the lineups, obviously like, the main things were, for the Warriors, no Draymond, for the Lakers, no LeBron or Austin Reeves.
Hmm.
Um, and then also like at the same time, right? Like most of the starters only really played in the first half, right? You look at the minutes distribution, right? Like Anthony Davis played 13 minutes. D'Angelo Russell played 16 minutes, right? You look at the Warriors, right? Like Steph Curry, Chris Paul, Klay Thompson, Wiggins, Looney, all of them played 13 minutes. So it was really more so about like the other guys on the team. In the first half, it was pretty competitive back and forth. And then in the second half, it pretty much turned into like, kind of like a blowout, kind of like the other one.
Right.
Where like the other team would get back in it and then the other team would just hit a few shots and put them away.
Hmm.
Um, so I think the stars for the most part, like, like D'Lo and Anthony Davis, I think they looked pretty good. Of course you don't necessarily expect them to look bad, but like the interesting thing for them was say for Anthony Davis, right? He hit a couple of threes, and stepped into that. Of course, again, it's preseason. But that's something that, if he can actually do that, that can definitely help the Lakers on offense because that allows him to play with other bigs, a little bit easier. Like, because that can allow you to have like him and a Jackson Hayes out there and not necessarily be worried about like, oh, we have two guys that nobody has to guard from the outside. Um, and then that leaves more space for our guards to cook, right? Say like a D'Angelo Russell, right? Who played pretty well in that first half, right? Then you had other guys, right? Like Jared Vanderbilt hit some shots, right? And then you had other guys, who had some rougher performances, say like a Torian Prince, who I think had like 5 fouls in like 8 minutes.
Yeah, and he was
Um,
1 for 5 as well.
yeah, yeah. Cam Reddish was like 0 for 4.
Yeah.
And then I think also got hurt towards the end of the game. So hopefully, he doesn't, have an injury that lasts for long. Max Christie, I thought looked pretty good.
Hmm.
But again, like, without LeBron and Austin Reeves, it's hard to have like a big picture takeaways. But it's more so like a lot of the guys that I kind of expected, to probably be helpful were more helpful. But it was also like the guys who were there last year because they were more familiar playing with each other. They looked the best. Whereas most of the other new guys, were a little bit shaky at times
Right.
because again, this is the first real stretch playing together. And then going to the Warriors, I thought Chris Paul in the minutes he played, you can kind of see like, some of the there in the sense of like, oh, he's a really good passer. He can set up some of these guys for easy looks. Um, obviously, and maybe that can help a guy like a Klay Thompson, right? He ended up being 2 for 8.
Hmm.
But still, like he got a lot of decent looks, I think, for the most part. And again, some of that was courtesy of, Chris Paul. He had 6 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. Um, and then after that, right, the bench guys, right, those were the other guys, right, like Moses Moody, Jonathan Kaminga, their rookie, Brandon Pojemski, right, he looked pretty solid.
Yeah.
Dario Saric, off the bench, also kind of looked pretty, intriguing as a backup big. So that was something to look at. The other rookie I forgot to mention for the Lakers, right, Hood Scafino, whatever, he kind of struggled offensively. He had some interesting possessions, like in terms of passing as a floor game.
Hmm.
But again, like kind of like with Pojemski, right? Like, even though I know that, like, say, like a Pojemski can be solid down the line, I don't think he'll play a whole lot for the Warriors the regular season. Only because, again, they're a team kind of like the Lakers that's looking to contend. And if you got a rookie, playing like 20 plus minutes a game every night because you don't have somebody who's there, who should be contributing, right? Then I think you're kind of in trouble. Um, but, again, we had, Pajemski going to a team like Golden State because we thought he'd be the type of guy that would fit in there really well.
Yeah.
Because he makes a lot of good decisions. He's a solid shooter. Pretty confident player as well. So I like a lot of things about him. And then, like I said, Kaminga, right, and Moody. Those are the other keys I think for the Warriors this season as well, because they're not rookies. I know they were playing against like a bunch of rookies by the end of the game, so that kind of inflated the stats a little bit. But those are two guys that really do need to step up and play really well this year. Because again, some of the other, veteran guys that the Warriors have had, for years are gone, right? Like there's no Andre Iguodala, or somebody like that, to kind of like settle everybody down, and kind of,
Right.
quarterback the defense with a guy like a Draymond. Now you got to rely on, these younger guys, to kind of, step up. And, like with a Kaminga especially, he's a guy that plays a position, and is like a really dynamic athlete. And that's something that the Warriors don't really have a whole lot of. And so if he can tap into that skill part of the game, in terms of his decision making and outside shooting and stuff like that, that could really help them. Again, like I don't want to do like a whole lot in terms of, like you said, overreact for preseason because again, we've seen this before sometimes with some guys like Wiseman. I
Right.
remember he looked great in summer league and even in preseason he looked pretty solid. And then they
Yeah.
ended up, benching him, putting him in the G League, and then trading him.
Yeah. It
Not
was
that that's
rough.
going to happen to Kaminga, but still, like
Not at this
again,
point in his career
regardless.
now.
Right. Yeah. Well, hopefully not. But
Yeah.
yeah. But like either way, something like that you do like to see because again, you want those young guys to figure stuff out. Because again, he was another guy last year for the Warriors who was not very happy with his role, right? Because I remember that Shams article that came out after the Warriors beat the Kings, where they were talking about, yeah, there were guys on the team that were not happy about not getting minutes, right? Like DiVincenzo, Jordan Poole, Kaminga. So, if he, shows real growth, he's going to get more minutes. And if he gets more minutes and he's productive in those minutes, that will help the Warriors, right? Because
Right.
he's the type of player I think that, like, if he pans out, it's a guy they could really use. You know what I mean? Because again, he's really good in terms of being an athlete. It's just the other parts of his game he's got to work at. Because like Moody, was kind of already like sometimes in the rotation in the playoffs. Because again, he's another guy, pretty solid athlete. He can guard bigger positions, he can rebound well, and he can shoot well. But Kaminga doesn't do all those types of things just yet. But if he can show that he does that, like I said, that will make Golden State a lot better, especially again in the minutes he plays with Chris Paul, because he'll look for him.
Yeah, because Kaminga's a little bit more raw, in my opinion, than Moody. But, for me, takeaway is pretty much the same thing. I would really watch this game to really look at the Warriors fit. I wasn't really concerned with the Lakers. I mean, yeah, we know the additions that they made, but it's pretty similar to last year outside of replacing, a few guys and bringing in some great steals in the offseason. But in terms of the Warriors, like you said, I really wanted to look at, Chris Paul's fit. I wanted to see, what that would look like, if we could get a little glimpse of it, and we did. We got about 13 minutes of it, which is pretty cool. And
Yeah,
it didn't bother me too much. It didn't concern me defensively. Offensively, I think it looked interesting. And I think, it'll continue to evolve. And then we can make a solid opinion on it, come postseason, hopefully. But then
right.
as for Kaminga, I thought he played phenomenal. I know, it was like not I'm not gonna say stat padding, but
Yeah,
kind of stat padding because he's kind of playing garbage time and like against some questionable candidates. But I think Kaminga played very well. It was kind of a showcase for his talent, and I like that.
yeah,
Same with Moody as well. I think he played fairly well. Or not fairly well, but pretty well. But overall, I I'm worried about the Warriors in some ways because I know it's preseason, but
Right.
overreacting is what preseason is
You
all
worried
about.
after a win?
Yeah, because this is a Lakers team without Braun, so we do have to factor that in, and Reeves, I think. So with the Warriors though, Klay Thompson shooting this poorly, it's kind of it's kind of making me question: is he cooked? And I think we talked about that a while back. Like, is Clay done? I don't think he's done per se, but
No.
he needs to bounce back. And I know this is preseason, it's
Yeah.
overreacting, but if we're seeing games like this consistently throughout the season, I think, the Warriors may need to look to move on from him. But,
Yeah. I
that
mean,
that's
I
just
don't
my takeaway from the game.
yeah. I mean, I don't think they're gonna move on from him just because of what he means to the team. And like again, like you said, for what it's worth, it's preseason. But that is kind of something, like I said, because I talked about Chris Paul with Clay Thompson, because I'm the person who doesn't necessarily think the fit
Right.
gonna work and makes a lot of sense. But
Hmm.
either way, I do think, I already mentioned Moody and Kaminga, but like I said, I think Clay is the other big part of, the season, the barometer for the season's success. Because again,
Hmm.
we saw him in the playoffs, and he, like you mentioned, he didn't really look that great. Um, for the most part, he was missing a lot of shots. Um, and defensively at times, depending on who he was matched up against, it wasn't amazing. And so that's something that's kind of important because if he has a bounce back postseason, and some of that, just comes down to missing shots, because again, like he did have a number of open looks for the Lakers at time against the Lakers at times, but there were also times where they weren't open, or I think also fatigue played a factor because when you're a small team playing against a bigger team, and that big team, is not like a slow plotting team. Like
Right.
that's a problem. Um, so that's the other thing. Just in terms of like, yeah, if he can't necessarily give you really really good production, then that's going to be a problem because without Poole, you don't necessarily have as much like explosive offense. Like Chris Paul, I think is probably more of a stabilizing force compared to Jordan Poole. But at the same time, right, like he's not necessarily going to have as many games, where it's like, oh, they need, X amount of, buckets, over the next few possessions, and he can heat up, and get like, three, four, five straight shots. I mean, he can do it sometimes, but you don't expect that as much in year 19, especially because
Sure.
again, how many games is going to play? How many minutes is he going to play? That's the factor, right? I think you can't write them off because obviously, as long as Steph is around, they're going to be a championship caliber team. It's just the question is again, you know, are they going to be able to, do it against a Western Conference now that's a lot better than the last time they won the title? Because when they won the title 2 seasons ago, the Western Conference was nowhere near as deep, right? Because because that was the year, when like the Suns won 60 something games or whatever, and it was pretty much, like between them and Golden State.
Right.
Dallas got to the conference finals, right? But obviously they had no shot against Golden State. But now, like, we've been talking about it, like there's like 10, 11, teams where like, they could all make a case where it's
Yeah.
like, hey, we could be in that play-in or playoff spot.
Right.
Like they're not all going to get there. So, and that's kind of the other thing, where it's like, yeah, because there's going to be some teams that are going to be disappointed, and so it's nice to get the preseason jitters out of the way because like I think a lot of these teams are going to have to get off to fast starts because if you have a stretch where it's like you lose a few games here and there, you could drop probably from like you could be like the third seed and then you could wake up and all of a sudden you're like ninth. I guess you could also, in a counter to that, say like, oh, well, then if you just lose a few games here, then you could just win a few more games to get back. But still, you again, you don't want to necessarily tempt fate like that. But I do think the battle for the Western Conference will be intriguing because I do
Yeah.
think the Warriors still belong there. But it is like you said, I do feel like there are some question marks about the Chris Paul fit.
Yeah.
But again, people had questions about what they were going to do after they got eliminated. Like we thought they were probably going to do something, right? We didn't expect Chris Paul. I know we talked about it and kind of brushed it off, and we were like, "That's ridiculous. That's not going to happen." And then now here we are, watching Chris Paul play in a Warriors uniform, next to all those guys.
It's
I think it's
scary.
kind of something. Yeah, it's something that's really funny too, because again, like he's had rivalries, with that team before, and even like the commentators, because when the game on NBA TV, they had the Warriors commentary, and obviously, like when they matched up against Houston or the Clippers in the past, I'm sure they probably weren't always necessarily like super
Right.
appreciative of Chris Paul, but now they have to because again he's on the team now, so hopefully the vibes are better. We'll see, because again, like, he does have a history, of not being mean, but he does have a history of times it seems of wearing out his welcome on teams,
Yeah.
um, for
I
one reason or another. Um,
I'm gonna assume that's probably ego based, and that kind of just comes with being a player in the NBA because you're in the NBA for a reason, and you got to have confidence, if you're in the NBA. So, but as
yeah,
for Chris Paul, I feel like the only thing that can really stop him is himself. I think his body is probably gonna be the only real test that he's gonna have to face, and I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I think he can overcome it, but I know I'm a little bit higher on the move than you. I know you're not like jumping through hoops to talk about it sometimes, but I get it. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the Warriors, but they got to figure something out. I think with Clay, that's my number one concern. I'm more concerned about Clay than Chris Paul, which is crazy to say in 2023,
yeah,
right?
that is interesting in year 19.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, then we had some other games. Today we had Bucks Bulls, no Giannis or Lillard, so not really a whole lot of takeaways from Milwaukee at that point, right? It was a number of their other guys playing, right, like Brook Lopez, Jay Crowder, Malik Beasley, a new addition, Thanasis, right, like, so not a whole lot of takeaways there. Chicago lost, right? They started Kobe White, so I'm curious, if he's going to be the starting point guard going
yeah,
forward. And he had a solid game, 14.6 rebounds, 6 assists. Like I said, we talked about Chicago before, where it's a rough situation in terms of what happened with Lonzo. Um,
yeah.
so
Prayers for
not
that.
a whole lot of positives for them. But at the same time, I do wonder what they do, because I do think they're another team, that's kind of something could happen at the trade deadline where they decide to do something, because it just feels like this roster doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to keep around. Like something I feel like has to give, because
Yeah,
they're not going to go anywhere.
yeah. It's nasty. I'm literally
Even
looking at the box score, and I'm just like,
right,
this roster is not really gonna go anywhere. I don't think. Um, And Lonzo being out just hurts them the most. I think that's the
right,
biggest
yeah,
problem because I think their starting five wouldn't be as questionable if Lonzo was in there, and even their bench play. I don't think they would have to rely on them as much if Lonzo was in there because Lonzo was playing basketball at an elite level before he went down with the injury.
yeah,
But yeah, Chicago's a no go for me. I'm not expecting very big things from them at all. Really not
yeah.
expecting anything from them at all, to be honest.
Yeah, and then like I said with Milwaukee, not too many takeaways there, because Giannis and Lillard didn't play. Yeah, Middleton didn't play either. So I mean, like, none of their three main guys played. And then the next one, Suns Pistons, right? So obviously that's a big one, right? The debut of the Suns, four guys, right?
Yeah,
Again, similar to other ones, they only played, part of the first half, I guess, right? 130 to 126, so very high scoring game.
yeah,
Went to overtime. Obviously, like I mentioned, the starters didn't, play after, the first half or whatever. Um, so, obviously with the Suns, right, they had a huge first quarter, right? They had 46 points in the first quarter, didn't really miss any shots.
right.
Beal, Booker, and Durant all played, really well on offense. Um, and then again, you had other guys, right, like Yuta Watanabe, right? Chipped in with 10 points, 5 boards, right? Grayson Allen, right, had a solid game, 18, 3 and 3. Josh Okogie was the fifth starter, which that was kind of one thing I was curious about, where I'm like, who's the fifth starter, next to these guys? Because we know obviously Beal, Durant, and Booker will play, and then obviously Nurkic is also he's the starting
Right.
center.
It's not Aiton
With,
anymore. Joy.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I guess it kind of makes sense, because you would like somebody, where it's like, oh, I'm not here to be a scorer. I'm here to defend. The main thing for him is, like, last year he was a guy where it was a similar role. And the question for him is, can he knock down open shots? Because he's going to be open a lot. And he's going to have to take them when he's open. Didn't really hit him a whole lot in the playoffs last year, because he's not really a great outside shooter.
Right.
Um, and that's why his minutes kind of dropped off, after a while in that series. Because again, like, you know, if you're mainly out there for defense, and you're not like an elite defender, right? Then you at least got to hit some shots, to kind of make up for that,
I
because
agree.
again, like, it's very hard, to play in a lot in the playoffs if you're really limited on one side of the ball. And if he's not hitting his shots, I mean, he can, do cleanup duty in terms of on the glass, but again, like, you got to at least hit, some of those open looks, right? Because he's gonna be open, because there's gonna be a lot of attention on the other guys. Um, but overall, like, how did you think the fit looked between the three guys? Because I think, like I said, I think offensively, I don't really have any real questions about the fit. Like, I know and understand, like, the idea of, like, yeah, they don't really need like a Bradley Beal type, But it's kind of like the Brooklyn thing where like the fit honestly wasn't really the question for me. It's really just the other stuff.
Yeah, it's not so much the fit, like you said. It's more so the execution for me, honestly. I don't even really think defense is going to be that big of an issue because I really think that Vogel. I think he'll be able to pull the defense out of these guys. We're going to see them play defense kind of scrappier. I think at a level that we haven't seen them play in their careers, and that goes for all three of the stars. But for me, I'm not really too worried, I guess, because for me, I think it's going to be hard. I'm curious to see how teams are going to game plan against this squad, right? Because if we're talking starters, which are arguably your most important players, you've got to guard Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant. All can attack the rim. They can all shoot mid range. They can all shoot threes. They can do it pretty much everything scoring wise, right? So it's like somebody's got to be left open, right? Because what
Yeah,
are they going to do? Are they going to double the hot hand? Is that going to be the strategy to counter these teams? I don't know, or this team, but for me, it's going to be interesting to see, like you said, the other guys. Are the other guys going to be able to step up and hit their shots as well? Now,
yeah,
my other question would be, how many shots are those other guys going to be getting? Because
yeah,
say they want to take Kevin Durant and Devin Booker out of the game. Okay, can Beal pick up the slack and then some other guys? Or are they going to be able to take all three players out of the game? That's the number one thing that's on my mind. Um, but the execution of this three-headed monster, I think, looked solid, for the limited minutes that we did see. And I'm just really hyped to see it, in a real NBA game, not a preseason
yeah.
one. That's what I'm
And
really
then the
hyped
other
about.
question, right? And then the other factor is like the bigs, right? Because like again, it's no longer Aiton. It's Yusuf Nurkic and Drew Eubanks or whatever, right? So I mean, those are pretty much your main bigs for the most part. And I feel like Eubanks is probably going to have to be the guy that you're probably going to have to at least close with
Yeah.
because I think he's a little bit bouncier, a little bit better on defense. I feel like just
Still,
I
both
think
are a little bit mid,
yeah, and that's
in my
that's the issue
opinion.
because again, that's the problem is again regular season I think it's fine, but say like you get to the playoffs, you're probably not going to be able to play those guys a whole lot, and then it's like all right, well, I think that probably what they're going to look to do is they're going to go small. And at
Right.
that point, probably have like, hey, Durant, you play center,
Ooh,
or maybe like you don't want Tanabe or somebody like that. It's kind of like a four small ball five,
yeah.
something like that. I feel like that's kind of the end goal for this team because
Okay.
I just feel like against like certain teams, like I don't know if they're going to be able to do that because like again, it's all matchup based at this point because there's no longer like a Golden State Kevin Durant Warriors team, that's like way up here and everybody else is like a few tiers below. I think a lot of these teams are really close in terms of how good they are. Um, so I think the main thing is that like what does the matchup look like, right? Because there's going to be certain teams, that some teams are just not going to do as well against, right? Like like say for the Suns, right? Like I feel like they're probably going to just be more of a jump shooting team in general, just because again like that's kind of the biggest strength of those three guys, where like they're really good pull up shooters. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
so from that perspective, right? Like again, like if they shoot like 60% from the field, 50% from three, which can happen because those are some really talented offensive players. That's a rough night, for the most part defensively. But then it's like, okay, can you do that four times out of seven? Maybe. And if you do, you're going to win a championship.
I feel like one
But
of them can do it. At least one of those guys is likely to go off.
yeah, but it's kind of like what we said. Like, I'm curious as to what are you getting out of some of the other guys because you need some of those other guys at some point, to be able to, in a big playoff game, in a big moment, either hit some big shot, get a big stop, or something like that. Get
Sure.
some offensive rebound because again, like the stars, aren't going to be able to do like every single thing for the team. Um, so that's kind of like I said, what I'm the main thing I'm looking at because I'm curious like which guys are going to be the guys that Vogel ends up trusting in his rotation, because again, like everybody played, but obviously not everybody's going to play over the course of the season, right? Like, is he going to go with, is he going to trust Grayson Allen, to close out games? Is he going to
I
trust,
doubt it.
yeah, is he going to trust Nasir Little to close out games? He could, maybe,
Maybe.
and it could be based off the hot hand. It's just something to think about. Because again, I do think they did better with their minimum signings than I think you would expect. And then obviously with the Aiton trade, you got a few more pieces. It's just now a matter of are those pieces actually going to help you? And that's the question. Um, but then on the other side, you have Detroit, who we hadn't talked about yet.
Yeah.
And I think they actually had, some kind of, really intriguing things about them as well, right? Asor Thompson, he played 39 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So, he played way more minutes than anybody on the team. The next closest was Isaiah Stewart, who played 24 minutes.
Right.
But, I thought, even though the shooting, like 3 for 9, but he did hit that big three to send it into OT. And I think he kind of flashed what we talked about in terms of why we liked him a lot is that all around game, right? He had 12 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists, block. So he can kind of do a little bit of everything, and he's a really good athlete. So I think Detroit got a really good player in there. And again for him, like I said, the main thing is can he get that jump shot working? Because again, I like a number of the guys on the roster. We talked about Detroit where we liked a lot of what they did this offseason. And I am kind of curious like how Monty Williams, the former coach of the Suns, pieces it all together. Because, like in this game, he didn't start Cunningham and Ivy. He started
Right.
Alec Burks alongside Cunningham, and then Asor was the wing, and then he had Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren. But again, like a lot of these guys didn't play the whole game. Um, Marvin Bagley, right? He ended up having a really big game where he closed,
Yeah.
right? 25.7 rebounds. There was a big report about him and Wiseman, kind of competing, to see who's going to be the backup center, right? Because
It's
again,
gonna
like
be
we mentioned,
Bagley, man. I could just feel
yeah,
it.
yeah, and that's kind of the funny thing is that both of them were former number two picks, which is, kind of interesting,
Yeah.
neither of them panned out on their previous teams. But, now they do have an opportunity, to kind of show like, hey, you guys made a mistake trading me, maybe we'll
Ball
see.
out.
But yeah, but regardless, I think that big man situation in Detroit is going to be intriguing because we mentioned how Dallas has a lot of guards. Detroit has a lot of bigs,
Yeah, it's the
'cause they
inverse.
are yeah, because they already started two bigs in the starting five, and then they had two bigs come off the bench. And again, and these are all guys that you could argue like they're really centers, right? Like
Right.
Isaiah Stewart is playing the four because he's like 6'8" or whatever. But when he first came in, he was a center,
Yeah.
right? Jalen Duren is a center. Wiseman's a center. Bagley, I guess, when he was drafted as a four, but he's really is more of a
He's
center.
really, yeah.
Um, so, that's kind of an intriguing thing. Even like Killian Hayes, came off the bench, and had some decent production, and
Yeah.
maybe he finally figures some stuff out. Jaden Ivey, right? He came off the bench and, and was okay. So I think Detroit has a lot of options in terms of what they can do because we talked about, we like a lot of the young talent on the roster. Cade Cunningham, can he stay healthy? Right, he was 5 of 15, which isn't amazing, but
Yeah.
still, it is preseason, and he missed a lot of time. So a lot of him, his thing is getting his feet back into it. So tell me what you thought about Asor Thompson because I think
Yeah.
you were really high on him, going into the draft. Like I thought I liked him too, but I think you had him a little bit higher than me in the draft if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, maybe like
Yeah.
by a pick or so.
Yeah, I had him going to the Wizards, unfortunately, so I'm really upset, that we weren't able to pick him up. But I'm sure Bilal will be great. But anyways, about Thompson, this is interesting because he hit the shot when it counts, but we can clearly see that I think he's going to struggle from deep early in his career. But hopefully, later down the line, I think he'll be able to figure that out. 3 for 9 is okay. I mean, like it's not great, but it's not the worst shooting percentage you could possibly have. It's low 30s, but we'd want to see that get up, and I think with time he'll be more efficient. That's all I really have to say about his scoring. But the hustle, the 10 rebounds, the 6 assists, the block. That's what you want to see from this guy. He's a all around do it all wing. He can even play some guard at times. Clearly, the turnovers I like him to cut back on a little bit, but he may have that clutch gene by hitting the three, but the intangibles seem to be there. Um, Clearly works hard. He played 39 minutes, so I think this was really his exhibition to see, what he's really about, and obviously check out what they've got at the center position as well. And also, I wanted to shout out Jaden Ivey because I love to see him actually hit his threes because I know he's not the best 3 point shooter or outside guy. So to see him go 3 for 6 from three, pretty cool to see. But yeah, back to Thompson. I think Detroit got themselves a stud. Um, and I don't think they should be worried, with anything. The consistency will come with time and experience. And I think it was probably just a little bit of nerves. And then once he calmed down, he started getting into his real game, which is the rebounds, the assists, the hustle defense, things like that. So I'm very curious to see, what Detroit can do this season because I feel like they've gotten a lot better than they were last year.
Yeah, and then the last big matchup, Sixers Celtics. Joel Embiid and James Harden didn't play.
Of course.
So we saw some of the other guys, right? Like I thought Tyrese Maxey looked really good, 24
Mhm.
points, 4 assists, 9 of 17 from the field, right? Patrick Beverly started, he was relatively productive in his minutes, right? 12 points, 5 of 7 from the field, 2 of 3 from three, right? He was a minimum contract signing. So we'll see how that works for Philadelphia. Jaden Springer off the bench, right? He looked really solid.
Yeah.
Um, and then everyone else, right? Like Mo Bamba, 3 for 9, 7.6 rebounds, 1 of 4 from three, right? Daniel House, 0 for 3 from the field, 0 points, 5 rebounds. Danny Green, 1 for 6. Um, Kelly Oubre 2 for 7. Right. Obviously, some of this will look different, when Harden and Embiid are playing, assuming Harden is still even on the roster. But obviously the main, the main show was Boston, right? And they
Yes.
played their starters for a good chunk of the game. All their starters played over 20 minutes a game. Holiday actually came off the bench, which, was kind of a surprise. But again,
Mhm.
I think he came in, kind of late, obviously because he wasn't traded to the team until not that long ago. And then I think he flew in, relatively late, but still, um, after that, right, the rest of the guys, right, Porzingis, he looked pretty good in the minutes he played, right, 17 points, 5 rebounds, had some impressive plays, right, had the lob, had the ankle breaker, right, where he kind of caught the guy off,
Yes.
the triple threat, had a block and protected the rim, right, Derek White, 7 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, Jalen Brown, 19 points, 3 rebounds, 1 assist, 7 of 10, one backwards pair of shorts, and then
Yeah.
Jason Tatum, 3 for 13, but did have 10 rebounds and 5 assists. And then Peyton Pritchard, right, and who just signed a new extension that we'll get into.
Mhm.
By the end of the show, right, 26 points off the bench, 9 of 14, 6 of 11 from three. Um, Again, Holiday didn't start, so I think that kind of it'll look a little bit different. But regardless, I think there was a decent amount to like, from the group. Obviously, it was actually a competitive game, with,
Sure.
Philly's best players not playing. But again, with preseason, it's going to be sloppy. Guys are going to be rusty. Um, I think the main thing is for Boston is again like the main questions would be like can Tatum elevate his game to a top five guy because he's getting closer to that age where guys are getting ready to start hitting their peaks.
Mhm.
If his peak is a top five player, right, they're going to have the ability to win the title because then they have that other strong core players around them in terms of from like they got six really good players, right? I mean, you have the starting five. And then you have, Horford, and then I guess you could count Pritchard potentially as the seventh guy. Um,
Yeah.
but I think, like I said, there's a lot to like about the roster, and once Holiday gets more acclimated, I think that will be kind of intriguing as well. Because he'll bring some more, size and physicality to that starting spot. And then, like I said, with Porzingis, the other factor is, him, right? Does his body hold up? Because last year, he didn't miss too much time at all, right? The only
Yeah.
time he really missed was, when the Wizards, and you can obviously speak to that because that's your team. But the only time he really missed was towards the end of the season when they didn't really care and they were just kind of sitting guys.
Yeah. You're not
Um,
wrong.
yeah, but and again, he had a really good season last year. I guess the main thing is, if you're Boston, you're banking on something that you don't historically get from him.
Yeah.
If you get him to play 60 plus games, right, then you have then obviously you got a pretty good shot of, accomplishing your goal. But if he's got to miss significant time, that's going to be a problem because they don't really have a lot of other bigs, lined up, to keep take his place, right? Then it would probably be Horford. But then with Horford, obviously he's getting up there in years at this point. He's 37,
Yeah.
right? So how much can you rely on him on a night to night basis? To be like a starter, because again, like that's the thing, like how many minutes is he gonna play? Luke Cornett, right? Is he gonna kind of now kind of step in as another backup big? Obviously that's something that they can kind of shore up at the deadline, but obviously the main question about Boston would be the depth, but in terms of the top of the roster, I think it's really good.
Yeah, I think the top end is great. And, we talked about this when we did our Celtics breakdown. I'm really high on, the Porzingis trade. I'm a lot higher on it, than I was before, and it seems like they're really forming an identity. I think the question would be, are they going to miss Robert Williams the third's, because of depth issues? I don't know, but it seems like they're really banking on Porzingis like playing phenomenal. Like, but the problem
Right.
is, with him, you're not really banking on his talent per se. You're banking on, his consistency and his healthiness, and that's kind of a big gamble, but I think, it's a high risk, high reward kind of thing. If it pays off, I think they could easily be champions.
Yeah, because the thing is that the guys they gave up, like outside of Marcus Smart, but say like Malcolm Brogdon and Robert Williams, those guys didn't really play a whole lot of games either, right? Like Robert Williams, I don't think has played more than like 50 games in a season,
Yeah,
probably like
it's bad.
one time. And Brogdon obviously, at times has had, a history of, missing games as well. So, they essentially kind of swapped out, they swapped out injury prone guys for other injury prone guys, but these guys when they're healthy are better.
Sure.
So I mean, because again, look at Robert Williams' game log, right? 32 games his rookie season, then 29, 52, 61, and then 35 last year.
Jeez, man.
So again, like I
That's
mean,
rough.
that's and a couple of those seasons were shortened, but still, like that's the issue. When he plays, he's a really good player, but the problem is he doesn't play a whole lot. And
Right.
Porzingis is a different player from Robert Williams, particularly, on on offense, right? Because he's more of a guy, that likes to take those outside shots, whereas Williams is pretty much, an at the rim guy,
Right.
right? Obviously he's also, he's a much bouncier athlete than Porzingis. And a little bit mobile defensively, but Porzingis can move around, decently for a guy his size. And they tried to throw some lobs to him. Obviously, it's a different feel from Robert Williams because again, Williams is smaller but a lot more athletic, whereas Porzingis is tall. So it's like, oh, he's 7'3" with long arms, so he could probably just sky up to get it.
Right.
And and I think, like I said, I think for Boston, I think they're banking on we're going to try to be better on offense, and we think that we can still play really good defense with this group. Because again, you got Holiday, you got White, you got Tatum and Brown. Those are all really good defensive players, and Porzingis can protect the rim relatively well. So they should still I feel like defensively, they should probably be, on par with what they were last year because they weren't as good defensively last year as they were the year they went to the final. So I feel like defensively they should be on par, if not maybe better, and they should definitely, I think, be, at least in maybe stats wise, offensively in terms of where they are ranked, it may not be, but so different because they were pretty good offensively last year.
Hmm.
But I think they'll be a lot more versatile and dynamic. They'll be
I
able to
think they'll
hurt
win
you.
more games with their
Yeah,
offense than their
yeah,
defense.
because last year, it was really three-pointer bust, right? Where if they didn't shoot 40% or better from three, then they weren't winning. But now, you have even Porzingis who can shoot threes. He can, play around the basket. He can roll. He's a lot more comfortable playing closer to the basket than he was earlier in his career, right? Like Holiday, can at times, get you from the mid-range or he can attack you in the pick and roll. So I think like I said, they should be more dangerous on offense because I think they'll be able to hurt you in more, in more ways. And I think that will ultimately help them because we already know they should be a pretty good defensive team. And
Right.
then obviously the other factor after that is Joe Mazzulla, right? Because now this is his, his first real season as a head coach. Because last year was difficult because he kind of was put in a position where like he was unexpectedly named the head coach,
Right.
but now he's the head coach. For sure. They got some more assistants. I think they got rid of some of the guys that he probably didn't mesh as well with. So now this is a roster that he should be able to coach. So now we get to see like does he have what it takes to coach a championship caliber roster? Because I do think this is a championship caliber roster,
Oh,
but is he
easily.
a championship caliber coach? I think we'll see.
Yeah.
But I think,
It'll
but I
be
think
it'll
it
be
primarily,
interesting.
yeah, but I think it primarily comes down to Tatum. Because
Yeah.
again, if he's not a top five guy, it's going to be a little bit harder to make it work.
Yeah, he needs to take that leap, and like you said, he does need to play. Honestly, I wouldn't even say top five. I'd really go as far to say top three, if you want me to be really honest. Because I
Yeah,
don't know. To me, I feel like his play is so up and down. Sometimes he looks like a bottom tier player, if you want me to be honest. But then some nights he looks like he's the best in the league. So it really is confusing, and I would like to see him nail that consistency on the head and just get it over with.
yeah, he had 50 points in a game seven. So I mean, like
My
he
point.
got to an NBA Finals at a relatively young age. But again, the question for him is, can he make it, to that next step? Because like I said, if he can be one of the top five players, I think they have a very good chance at winning the title. And I think they
Okay.
already have a chance. But again, if he takes another leap, then that makes it, a lot easier. I think because then it makes it easier for everyone else.
Absolutely.
So now we're gonna get into a new segment called Hot or Drop, where our host Darby over here, he's gonna give a series of hot takes that he's got, and obviously we'll talk about it in terms of whether or not hot in terms of like, yeah, this is something that's really serious but really strong take, or drop. That's ridiculous. There's no way this is gonna happen. So, I guess we'll start off with your first take. Let's see what you got.
Yeah, so just to give you guys some context, this is kind of based off of, what we saw during the off season. Not too much of the, preseason as that's still underway. Maybe we can do another one involving the preseason, but just overall off seasons, trades, free agency, stuff like that. So the first one to kick it off, I think this might be the warmest one. But Damian Lillard wins MVP.
Okay.
So yeah, the my explanation would be, this is the first time that we're gonna see him on a team that is going to be contending. We're this is a first for us, I think. And he's going to be playing with Giannis, another former or not another, but a former MVP. Um, and it should be really interesting to see how these guys mesh. I think we're probably going to see Lillard's assists go up. I think we're probably also going to see his efficiency go up because I think we're going to be seeing him spot up a little bit more. And I'm really just curious to see how the Bucks will use him in tandem, with not even just Giannis, but some of the other guys like Brooke Lopez, Chris Middleton. I think Dame makes his team so much better that he might push, the limits and boundaries of what MVP really means in the league. Um, Especially if he has a career year, again, because he is coming off of a really stellar year. So I don't know if you agree with me. I don't know if you think that's hot or drop, but we'll see.
I guess for this one, I kind of like it, but at the same time, I feel like this one I might have to drop. I think the issue is I think because he's playing with Giannis,
Hmm.
I feel like it's gonna probably split votes where it's like, oh, if the Bucks are winning a lot of games, there's gonna be people, that might put Giannis in the MVP conversation, and he'll
Sure.
get a lot, because he'll be their best player, and then Lillard may get some, but probably not necessarily enough to win it. And then obviously, like, the other factor is, games played. I think, now in order to get those awards, you got to play a certain amount of games. I think what is it? It's like 65.
Yes.
Um, he's got to play 65 games. Um, which he hasn't done in the last few years. And again, I think some of that was probably like, Portland kind of just throwing the season away.
Hmm.
Um, but still, like I said, I think the main thing more so than that is the vote split. I think, and then like age, because age wise, even though the oldest MVP winner was 35, and he is 33. At the same time, like you mentioned, he had a great season last year. Um, my guess is his numbers will probably go down a little bit just because he'll be playing with more talent. But
Sure.
I do think the efficiency will probably be a little bit better. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
because he shot
that's what I said.
46. Yeah, like you said, 46 from the field, 37 from three. It wouldn't surprise me if it was a little bit better, just because, like you said, playing off of another superstar, he's going to get a lot better looks, and things where it's like, oh, yeah, these are the shots, that I've been wanting my whole career.
Yeah, pretty
So,
much. It's not going to
yeah,
be as
so,
hard for him. I think the game is going to come easier to him, and that may, open the door for a whole new Damian Lillard.
right. Yeah. So, like I said, I like the take, but I feel like I'd have to drop that one because I feel like it's going to be very difficult for somebody to win MVP if they're playing alongside, like, a big time, co star.
Okay, I can't hate on that. All right, next one. This one's an interesting one. I've seen this one floating around a lot, so this might be hot. Jordan Poole is a first-time All-Star. What do we think of this one? I
All
don't
right.
think I really need to explain it because I mean he's on his own team now. He's not going to be playing in the shadow or behind Steph, Clay, and Dre. So this is his team. It seems like the Wizards have pretty much given him the keys to the franchise, and I'm all for it.
Yeah. This one is going to be tough. I feel, now Lillard has come into the Eastern Conference, so that's another guard,
Yep.
that he's going to have to compete for, so you got Damian Lillard. Brunson was not an all-star last year, but maybe he might be. Harden was, but if he goes out west, right, then somebody else will take his place,
Right.
right? Because the guards last year, I think all-star wise in the East, it was, what was it? It was like Holiday,
Mm-hmm.
it was Harden,
Hmm.
it wasn't Trey Young because he wasn't an
Mm-mm.
all-star. Um, Man, who were the other ones? I can't remember off the top of my head like all the All Stars in the Eastern
I
Conference.
know it was Holiday.
Yeah,
Um, mm, I don't know. I literally don't know off the top of my head.
yeah. So I mean, I guess the main thing is that if that's the case, he might have a chance because he'll put up the numbers. Obviously they won't be a good team. But at the same time, he'll have a chance to get it. I guess. Um, Halliburton, I think, was an all-star, right? And maybe he doesn't get to be an all-star again this year because
Mhm.
that's the issue. He's gonna have to beat out some guys, right? Because again, Halliburton, Holiday, Lillard, obviously, Brunson, that's again like he could beat one of those guys in terms of numbers. Like he could probably beat Holiday in terms of like, oh, he's got quote unquote better counting stats than Drew Holiday. So, we'll get him in as an all-star. I don't know if he'll get like he won't be a starter, obviously, because I feel like,
Yeah,
the
he's not gonna
Warriors,
be a starter.
yeah, I don't think the Warriors fans are gonna vote him in as an all-star now.
No.
Maybe the Wizards fans might, but I don't, their fan base isn't quite as big. So I feel like that one I might have to drop.
Okay.
But again, at the same time, I like it because I feel like it definitely can happen because on a team like that where he'll have a lot of opportunities to score and have the ball in his hands and put up numbers, he has a chance. It's just the issue is he won't be a starter and then he's going to have to get voted in, by, the other coaches or whatever around the league and are they going to choose him, over somebody else? Right? Like I could see something where somebody's like, "Oh, Brunson wasn't an all-star last year, so let's put him in this year, or something like that." Or like, "Oh, somebody like a Brunson is on a better team, with a better record.
Right.
So we're gonna put him in." So I feel like that's the issue.
It's tough. I think, it'll come down to the splits
But I
like you
think he
said.
definitely will have a career year in terms of
Yeah.
like, a lot of the numbers. It's
I
just,
think,
again,
yeah. It may not be efficient, and it,
yeah, if
it
it
may
could
be
be
on
a
a lot of shots, but
yeah.
if it gets the job done for his career, it gets the job done. I think this
All
one is
right.
more on your level. Um,
Yeah.
Orlando Magic get out of the play-in and win in the first round. What do we think of
Ooh.
this one? Because I know we're both very high and excited for Orlando. They've got a lot of potential star
Oh,
power. I would say, but what are we
ah,
thinking on this one?
I really do like Orlando, but I
Ah,
feel
you're gonna
but
drop all of them, man.
no, it's just like I really like Orlando.
Hmm.
But I feel like it's kind of like Oklahoma City, where I feel like we're gonna have to pump the brakes at least a little bit.
Sure.
I do think that they can get out of the play-in, 100%. Again, it's gonna be based off of who they have to play. But again, in a one-game scenario, they could absolutely, go into the play-in and be the 7 or 8 seed.
Hmm.
I think the where I would have to drop it is I don't think they will win in the first round because if
Okay.
they're in the play-in, that probably means they're gonna have to play like Boston or Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And I feel like the only way they're gonna beat one of those two teams is if somebody's hurt, which
Right.
again could
Which
happen.
is likely.
Uh,
Just saying.
yeah, which is possible. Again, if a Giannis or somebody like that, is hurt, if Giannis or Tatum is hurt in the first round, yeah, like they could. But that's the only scenario. I feel like, I don't feel like they're gonna be able to like get out of the play-in and then beat one of those two teams if they're
That's fair.
healthy. So that's the issue where I would probably have to drop that one. But if you had just said they'll make the play-in
Yeah.
and at like a 7 or 8 seed, I would have actually probably said that's high. Like
Okay.
I actually would have accepted that. I would have said like, yeah, that's gonna happen.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Next one. This one's interesting.
Okay.
Warriors lose in play-in. This is
Oh,
this is kind of tethered
this is
to a
the hottest one to me,
yeah,
other than the line.
this is tethered to two things, I think. One,
Okay.
I'm not sold on Clay actually being Clay anymore. That's the
Okay.
biggest thing. I think, he's holding this squad back and, I'm not trying to be mean here, but
Okay.
it's kind of hard to watch because, we're talking about one of the greatest three-point shooters of all time being left wide open in the playoffs against the Lakers. Are you kidding me? That was just like mind-boggling to watch for me. I understand, bad year, but if it continues, I don't really see them having a great regular season considering they did lose, one of their better scorers, I guess you could say in Jordan Poole. But then also, I think there is some uneasiness with the Chris Paul situation. So I know you can attest to that. You're on that side for sure. So I do have to kind of take that into account. Like, I'm not going to sit there and say, yeah, Chris Paul is guaranteed to work. But if it doesn't work out and Clay is bad, I think we could see them potentially fall to the play in spot and lose in that thing.
Yeah. This one is a really spicy one because the thing is there's so many variables here. Because the thing is like last year, they were a play-in team.
Hmm.
Well, no, they weren't a play-in team. They were the 6th seed, but
Hmm.
like they were very close. Because that final stretch was like literally a game or so. But the thing was that last year there was a lot of turmoil and a lot of crazy stuff going on.
Sure.
And then you go into this season, right? And now you moved on from Jordan Poole. You brought in Chris Paul, who always gets along with everybody, of course. Um, but after that, right? Like Wiggins missed a lot of time,
Right.
due to some personal stuff. Um, so that was the other factor as well. Gary Payton, right? He came in late, and when he came back, he wasn't, initially himself. So I feel like there is a level of like they could be better in the regular season, because of those factors. Um, but like you said, there is a world where like, yeah, the age just catches up where it's like, hey, Klay Thompson just isn't playing as well.
Right.
And then he's not playing well. Chris Paul, kind of just runs out of steam and isn't playing as well. That's a scenario where it could happen. So I'm not gonna say, because like the Orlando one, like absolutely not. I think
Okay.
like this
Okay.
one
Cool.
is potentially possible.
Right.
I still feel like I'm gonna have to drop it,
Okay.
like not to drop all of them, but like I feel like that one, it's like I don't know. I'd have a really hard time seeing Golden State like with their like complete roster just missing the play in,
Right.
like losing in the play in. I would just have a really hard time in believing that. But I also didn't really expect them going into last season, to be kind of like a mediocre team. So,
Right.
again, there is a world where like, hey, everybody's a year older. Maybe the young guys don't pan out as much. Chris Paul doesn't work, and then you just lose a bunch of games. But then the other factor is you do have an out because of Chris Paul's contract. You could move him, and
Easily.
that's the other thing that personally I'm banking on. Where I think at some point they're going to move him, for somebody. I don't
Right.
know. Like I could be wrong,
I know.
but
Yeah.
at the
It's
same
tough.
time, this one I think definitely is one of the better ones. And like, yeah, this is a possible scenario. Just
Yeah.
because again, like you just don't know because there's a lot of questions I think with the Chris Paul fit on the roster. Is it going to work? And how do all of these guys look? In terms of the core at their advanced ages.
Yeah. Especially, if everything goes wrong, I think this is probably, their ceiling. Um,
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
up?
Because I just because as a final, to put a cap on it, like you could look at it from the perspective of, we have the Nuggets, like Suns, Lakers, Warriors as the top four teams in the Western Conference.
Hmm?
Um, doesn't but one that doesn't mean that those are going to be the top four seeds, and two, there's also the potential that one of those teams ends up just not being as good as we think,
Right.
and then the question is of those four teams, which one is it? Because I think
Warriors.
it yeah, because I think it could be either one of the Suns or the Warriors.
Warriors for
Um,
sure. For me.
but yeah, but at the same, yeah, because that's the thing. Like, again, like we looked at the Warriors, they were the 6th seed last year. The Nuggets obviously were the 1 seed. Lakers were like 7th, but for much of the season they were like 13th or
Yeah,
whatever
they
they
were
were.
horrible.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing, because I do feel like one of those top teams will not be a top 4 seed. One of those teams is going to be
It's gonna
5
be
or lower.
Golden State. It's
Yeah,
gonna be
one of
Golden State. I'm banking on that. I would
yeah
put my
yeah
mortgage on that.
Yeah, one of those teams. So I feel like that's definitely like that's the biggest part of the hot take where I think that's pretty reasonable. Where one of those top four teams is going to be 5 or lower, right? Potentially a play-in team because we saw it last year where the Heat were a play-in team and got to the finals, and the Lakers were a play-in team and got to the conference finals. So
Sure.
I think that's definitely the most likely scenario. I think one of those four teams is going to be lower, and I don't think it's going to be Denver. Lakers, if LeBron and AD both miss a ton of time at the same time, and then, for the Suns, if again, multiple guys miss a ton of time,
It's a
and then for the
disaster
Warriors,
class, man.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like that. But again, that could happen to anybody. But still, I think one of those top four teams is not going to be a top four team seed one for sure.
Yeah.
At least one of them.
Yeah. All right. This one I think is one of the more interesting ones.
Okay.
All right. Bear with me on this one. Chet
Okay.
Holmgren wins Defensive Player of the Year. What do we think about that?
Oh man, that one. I think he could potentially be in the conversation.
Okay.
Um, I think the difficulty is he's going to be a rookie.
Pretty much, yes.
And rookies don't normally win, you know, those type of awards other than Rookie of the Year.
Right.
Uh, and he's gonna he's gonna have to beat out, some really tough competition, right? He's gonna have to beat out guys like Giannis,
Mm-hmm.
potentially Jared Jackson Jr., who won it
Mm-hmm.
last year. Even a guy like an Anthony Davis or a Bam
Mm-hmm.
Adebayo or somebody like that. Maybe Draymond can potentially be in the mix, if he plays enough games. So that's the problem is he's gonna have to, beat out all of those guys.
Yeah.
Um, so that one is tough because I feel like again, like a rookie winning Defensive Player of the Year, Has that ever happened? I mean,
It
I'd have to
hasn't.
look.
I don't
Yeah,
think it
like
has. But I'm
yeah,
telling you,
like
I think he has the potential. I think he has the frame for it. And
yeah,
I think that was something that everybody slept on, especially in the summer league. It was very interesting to see him,
yeah.
you
I
know,
mean,
be
we
in
saw
in healthy form. It's pretty cool.
right because, like you said, we saw it.
Yeah,
Where
live in person.
yeah, where he looked great defensively in terms of his length, his timing, his thought process in terms of like, here's my positioning, here's where I gotta go. I think he's gonna be,
He's got
really
that
good
swagger
defensively.
too.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and he wants to play defense, and that's the other factor as
Hmm
well. Despite his skinny frame, I think he's
yeah,
gonna be a really good defender. If he's a defensive player of the year guy, then Oklahoma City is gonna be, a really dangerous
I'm
team. If
telling
they
you, I think OKC has one, like, somebody special in Chet Holmgren. I think he can do it. Has it ever been
Yeah,
done though? Did you find out?
yeah, I'd have to. Yeah, no, I actually hadn't looked yet. Let me actually check.
Yeah. But yeah, to continue the conversation,
Yeah.
it's Chet
No,
Holmgren, bro. Okay, it hasn't happened.
yeah, no player in the history of the award has won in their rookie
I think
season.
he can do it.
So yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I don't think he'll win it,
Okay.
but I do think that he could be in the mix. If Oklahoma City ends up being better than we expect,
hmm
it will be because one of the reasons will be because he's in the mix for that. Because
Okay.
that's going to have to be where they're going to have to take a step up,
Right. Their center play
defensively.
was fairly weak in my opinion last year.
Yeah, exactly. So if they're a top whatever seed,
Yeah.
like I said, the scenario where let's say a team like a Golden State has a rough regular season or something
Right.
like that, but then Oklahoma City just has an insane regular season and all their young pieces get better and pan out. That's where it's possible. So
Sure.
I'm not gonna say So that one, you know what? I guess for that one, I'll say that one's hot.
Let's
I
go.
think I said the Warriors one was a drop one. I'll change that one to a hot,
Okay.
and I'll put the Holmgren one to a hot.
Okay.
I think the Warriors one is more likely than the Chet one,
Okay.
but I
So
think those are
uh,
really good ones.
another question, this is not really related to this isn't really one of them, but it's kind of an extension of the Chet one. Do you think he's going to win rookie of the year instead?
Oh man,
Or are
I
we
think
put
he'll.
or are we taking Wemby all the way?
I feel like Wenbanyama is probably has a better chance of winning it because I feel like he's probably just in terms of the numbers he's going to put up because
Right.
he's not playing, with like a Shea Gilgis Alexander, or somebody like that. I mean,
Right.
the Spurs have guys that are pretty
What their
solid
starting
offense.
point guard is what, Trey Jones?
Yeah, and then after like Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, those are solid offensive players.
Sure.
Um, but they're not Shea Gilgis Alexander, where like
Nowhere
they're gonna
near.
have the ball a lot, and control a lot of the offense, and score.
Yeah.
So I feel like Wembanyama is probably gonna win it because again, it's not about the wins, it's about the numbers. I think for that award,
Absolutely.
I just feel like he's probably gonna put up bigger numbers than Chet just because he's not playing with as many guys.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
Yeah. But
That's
I
kind
think
of why I didn't really phrase it as
yeah,
rookie of the year. I put it as depoy because I
but
think it's possible.
yeah, but I will say is if he's not one of the finalists for rookie of the year, then that's a disappointment
Oh,
because
for sure.
technically, even though like he's gonna be a rookie, like he was drafted 2 seasons ago, and he's had a whole off season and
It's
another
Ben
off season.
Simmons all over again.
Yeah, exactly.
In
So
terms of the rookie year, not not
yeah,
not, not the other stuff. Don't
yeah,
don't
no, yeah, we were
we
talking
don't want to
straight up.
get that taken
Yeah,
out of
I remember.
context.
Yeah, I remember how dumb that argument was. He can't win rookie of the year because
Yeah.
he was, because he played last year,
Yeah,
even though
people
we
still
literally
make
had
fun of
Blake
it.
Griffin. Yeah, even though we literally had Blake Griffin win rookie of the year after missing his first season. If you miss all of your first season, you're a rookie.
Yeah, you didn't
Like,
play a game in the NBA, so you don't have
yeah,
experience.
yeah. Like Julius Randle was not eligible for rookie of the year his following year because he did play. He
Right.
only played
He
a few
just got
minutes,
hurt in his
but
first game,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah, he
Um
still played. So
all
that's
right.
my thing. If he's not in that position, then that's a problem.
Sure.
But
All
we'll
right.
see.
This one's an interesting one. I think you're probably not going to like this one. Blazers make the playoffs. What do we think about that?
Uh, I think they could compete for the. I think they might potentially try to compete for the play-in, but I don't
Mhm.
think they'll win enough games.
Okay.
I think the issue is that if they were in the East, I think they'd have a chance to be in that
Sure.
play-in spot. Because you look at some of the roster. Obviously, they moved on from Holiday, but they do have Scoot. Shaden Sharp, Simons, Brogdon, DeAndre Ayton, Robert Williams, Jeremy Grant, of course. Matisse Thybulle. So they have a number of solid players. Um, the issue is that again, are all those guys going to fit, right? Or, how much of a leap do some of the other young guys who are already there, take? How much does Portland want to win? Um, so that's the thing. I don't feel like they're going to make the playoffs. So I,
Okay.
I would drop that one. Like I said, I like the other two better. I just think for that one, I don't think Portland wants to make the playoffs. I think they want to tank, and
Okay.
start the rebuild. But I do think like that they will be very entertaining, and it wouldn't surprise me if they win, more games than maybe they're expected. I'm not entirely sure right now what their over under is,
Hmm.
but but I think it's possible. If it's like in the low 20s, maybe they could win a little more than that, just because I think they have some solid talent. But then the other factor is I think some of that talent they're gonna move. Like,
Yeah.
it wouldn't shock me if they traded like a Malcolm Brogdon,
Right.
um,
I
at
agree.
the deadline or something like that. It wouldn't surprise me. Or even like a Jeremy Grant. Like that's the problem. Like, because I still feel like with Portland, there's still more moves for them to make.
Hmm.
And so if they make those moves in terms of trading guys, that's where I think like, yeah, they're probably not gonna, make the playoffs. I think right now the odds have them at like 28.5. Yeah.
They're
So
gonna win more
basically,
than that, though.
yeah, are they gonna win more than basically are they gonna win more than 30 games? I think,
Yeah, I
that
think they're gonna win more than 30 games just based off the
because
talent that I've been seeing.
yeah, because
And just thinking about it, I'm like, I'm really expecting Shaden Sharp to take a leap. I'm expecting, Jeremy Grant to play very well. I'm expecting Scoot to have a direct, immediate impact. This is a franchise changing player we're talking about here. Um, Simons, I think, will play very well. And I think even, a guy like Murray will play, pretty well. Chris Murray, that is. So I'm very, curious to see how they do. And I just kind of threw them in there because I do have a lot of hope and hype for them.
yeah, I think Portland, like I said, is in a really good spot. It's just again the difficulty is that somebody in the West is going to win less than 30 games,
Sure.
and it's
It's the
probably not going to
Spurs.
be any of the other teams that we mentioned.
It's going to be the
The Spurs,
Spurs.
yeah, it could be the Spurs, but is that the only team? I mean, it's possible because again, the West is from top to bottom better than the East.
Yeah, I
So
think it's more competitive.
like yeah, so like the bottom of the East is probably the teams that are going to win, below 30 games. Like you might see like 3, 4 teams, maybe win, like 30, 25, 29 or
You can
whatever.
go
And then
15
in
if
the
you
West,
want.
yeah, and then in the West you may only have like one or two because again, like, who's it going to be, right? Is it the Rockets? Is it the Spurs? Is it the Blazers? Because those are really the only three teams, that are probably it's not in the cards for them to be in the play-in or playoffs.
Right.
Maybe Houston, maybe, but again, they have a lot banking on them as well
Who
because
knows?
again,
We just got to wait and see, though.
yeah. So,
And speaking of waiting and seeing, this is the final one. So I
okay.
think this one you'll probably be a little bit more warmed up to.
Mm.
Boston Celtics win the finals. What do we think about this?
I think, it's kind of funny. I've been going back and forth, in terms of like which team in the East do I like better? Do I like Milwaukee or do I like Boston better? Um, and I don't know. Like after the holiday thing, I feel like I'm feeling more warm towards Boston than I am Milwaukee
Hmm?
because I do feel like I feel like their defensive potential is better, and
Way
I think
better.
they're still going to be pretty good on offense. It's just the question is the Tatum factor, and again, it's not bad. It's not that he's bad. I'm not hating on
I
Jason
get it.
Tatum like some people might think. It's just again, I already know that Giannis is a top 5 player, so I already know what I'm getting from him. And then Lillard as as a co-star, right, as a number two. Well, that's a lot different than him being a number one. So, I feel like those questions are answered from Milwaukee. But then I look at Milwaukee and then I'm like, I feel like I have more questions about them than I do Boston. Because
Sure.
with Boston, I feel like it's more so the depth and the health of the guys, which, you have to weigh. But with Milwaukee, I have more concerns about, what do their guards look like? What do they look like on defense? So, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of leaning more towards Boston, in terms of their roster over Milwaukee. So I might have to say that one's a hot one.
Okay.
Because,
W.
yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't decided, who my pick to win the title is, but
It's
I
too
do feel
early.
like, Yeah, it's too early, but I do feel like I do kind of like Boston's group a little better than Milwaukee's, but at the same time, then it's like, well, I got to factor in who do I think is coming out of the West because I think, say like a team like Denver, I think Milwaukee will do better against Denver than Boston. I feel like Boston would have a little bit of a tougher time against Denver. But then if Boston plays a team like, I don't know, like Phoenix, I feel like they could probably beat Phoenix. You know what I mean?
I
So
get you.
yeah, and again, that's the thing. I think that's the cool thing about this season is that there's a lot of really good teams, and I think matchups will be a lot more of a factor than they had been in the past. Because in the past, a lot of times a team could just beat another team because they're just flat out better. They're more
Hmm.
talented, right? Like, we had that stretch, for multiple seasons, right, where you had the Heat's big three, although they didn't win every year, right? But and then you had the Warriors one, which was on steroids, right? Where
Yeah,
if
it's
they
really
weren't
amped
hurt,
up.
they won the title, right? They were there for 3 years, and the only year they didn't win was when they had injuries. Um, so it's not going to be like that this year, where I think there'll still be a lot of really good teams, but again, not so much to the point where like this team, no one can ever beat them. Like I just feel like there's a lot of really good teams that could beat the other one. It just again, I think a lot of it's dependent on the matchup, and I think that's what makes the East and West intriguing as well. Because like in the Western Conference, in terms of the record, I don't know if a team is going to win like 60 games in the Western Conference.
Doubt it.
Like nobody won 60 games in the West last year. Denver was the one seed at 53. Now they took 2 months off, so maybe they would have won 60 games if they had gone all out. Um, but I think in the East, I think either Milwaukee or Boston could get to 60 wins because I just feel like, they're a lot better than the teams that are below them, right? Like I think they're
Right.
better than Philly, Cleveland, New York, Miami, teams like that. I think both of those teams are better. So I think they'll be able to pile up wins, especially, against the bottom of the East because they'll play the bottom of the East. Like they'll play, teams like a Washington, or like a Detroit or somebody like that, 4 times, whereas like in the West, we'll say like you're in the Pacific Division, right? So that's the Lakers, the Clippers, the Warriors, the Suns, and the Kings. All five of those teams could make the playoffs, and all those teams will play each other 4 times.
Yeah.
So somebody's gonna lose a lot of games in those matchups. So that's
It's going to be a nightmare for whatever
yeah,
team, does lose
yeah.
those games.
Exactly. And then you got to factor in the other teams, right? They're going to have to play all those teams at least 3 times as well, in the Western Conference. Whereas say like, the Bucks and the Celtics, they only have to play each of those teams out west twice
Right.
and only one time, on the road.
Right.
So
I get it.
that's the other that's the other factor as well. So I think, in the regular season, I do think the Bucks and the Celtics will have more of an advantage because they'll probably win enough games where they'll probably have home court over whoever comes out in the Western Conference. And I think
It's
home
smart
court is
thinking.
still very important.
Yeah. I think that's smart thinking. I think that's definitely the approach that we should, take and look at it with because I feel like there's a lot of little things that we can look at under a microscope, especially with storylines. Uh, I don't want to say like beef or drama, but there is some stuff going on. I feel like we have multiple guys going to different squads and now they're trying to prove themselves. So it's I think this season will be one to watch, and I think it'll be very entertaining and probably better than the last one.
I think it's going to be one for the ages. I think this is
Exactly.
going to be. I mean, I know like it feels like people say this every year, but I really do feel like
Yeah, this is the
this
one.
season is going to be one of the best ones that we've had in a long time because I just think like there's so much optimism in terms of again there's probably, about, at least 5 teams, right, that you could say they have a chance to win the title, right? Because again, you got at least, four in the West, and then you have a couple in the East, right? So like I said, you got at least 5, 6 teams, and that wasn't the case a few, 5 years ago, right? If even like a few years ago, right? Like, like we would say there'd be a lot of teams that had a chance, but it was really only like two at the most, maybe three,
Sure. Yeah, it
if
was
you're
more
lucky.
so like three
Yeah,
because there was
exactly,
always
right?
that one wild card guy or team
Right.
that we were like, okay,
Yeah.
maybe they have a shot, and then they just get bounced, and then we're like,
Right,
okay, so it's
exactly.
back
Like
to these
during the
guys.
Cavs Warriors era, it was basically like 3 teams, right? It would be Cleveland in the East, and then the Warriors in the West, Cleveland in the East, and then if the Warriors don't make it, somebody else like maybe a Houston,
Right. Yeah,
or
that's what I was thinking.
something. Yeah, exactly. But but now again, you have 3 times as many now. So
It's
and the
really
talent is
competitive.
yeah, and the talent is spread all throughout, and even the bad teams, right? Like, or the quote unquote bad teams. There's going to be a lot of talent on those teams as well, right? Like we went over, in the preseason, like some teams. that even though they're not probably not going to be that good, they got a lot of talent. Or, when we did our offseason, takes, like there's a lot of teams that even though they're probably not going to be, in the conversation for, a contender or even a playoff team, they're going to be entertaining, and you couldn't necessarily say that at one point. If
Yeah.
you rewind, a few years ago.
Yeah. I agree.
So
It's gonna be
yeah,
it's gonna be crazy.
yeah. So now we're gonna get into some news and rumors, pretty small stuff for the most part. The Clippers, they're according to Woj still trying to get Harden. They're not gonna increase their offer, which I think makes sense, right? Like essentially, a pick, and maybe and a few players or whatever. And Philly wants more picks. Which again, like it's a staring contest, right? Like we know Philly wants more for Harden than what I think they are realistically going to get, and we know the Clippers want Harden and don't want to give up a whole lot to get him, which again makes sense. I think if you're the Clippers, Woj mentioned that they were really close to getting Holiday, and it seemed like Boston, once they threw in Robert Williams, that's kind of what made all the difference. Whereas, like, if Boston hadn't have done that, then it probably would have been the Clippers that would have gotten him. And
Right.
like I said, we talked about it. I think we both feel like Holiday would be better for the Clippers than Harden, just
Mm-hmm.
because of what he can do on both ends of the floor.
Yes.
I mean, I just feel like you don't have quite as many questions about like how he's going to mesh with other guys. It's not that Harden isn't good because he's still a good player. It's
Right.
just again, I think there's the other stuff the intangible stuff that you have to factor in as well.
It's all
Um,
about fit and identity for
yeah,
me.
yeah, and it's actually kind of funny because there's been a conversation that people have had, over the last few days, about Harden versus Westbrook, because now it's possible they could be teammates again.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a lot of debates as to like, which guys had the better career, which guy would you rather have on your team, and where do you feel like you stand on that? Because again, these are two
Yeah.
guys that I think are pretty polarizing players, where like they have their fair share of fans, where they there's a lot of people that like those players, especially for the teams that they initially played for. But then you have a lot of people, that are big time critics of those players, or some people would say haters.
Yeah.
But where do you stand, in terms of like, which guy, do you think had the better career? Which guy do you think is better? Which one do
Right.
you like better? Or
Right.
like
Sure.
which one do you think, maybe is underrated or overrated or whichever?
So right now, I don't want either of them. I'm kidding. But all time, I would definitely have to go with Russ. I think, his impact and what he did with the triple double, it was wild. You just kind of had to be there to see it. It was, and honestly, I feel like we're getting to that point where it's somewhat underappreciated at this point, because it's like, dang, time really flew by. And, now he's kind of been on the decline. I know it's kind of sad, sorry to say, but, he's not the same player as he was, when he in his MVP season. Then he broke the triple double record, I think, in Washington. So, he has a lot of records, but then you can't discount Harden because Harden really changed the game in some aspects, whether it be drawing fouls, the offensive heavy mindset. So you can't really discount one or the other. And it's kind of hard to compare because they both haven't really won anything. So we're kind of basing it off of uh, impact and won anything in terms of championships, that is. So I would probably just have to go with Russell Westbrook just because I think his impact, I think he is more of a, I don't know how to, I guess, cult fan base. It's kind of interesting because you have a lot of Westbrook
You
supporters,
do.
but I think you have even more Westbrook haters, you know?
And I think, yeah, and it's actually really funny because he didn't really have, I don't think, a whole lot of haters until like maybe the last 3-4 years or so. Because in Oklahoma City, he was
He's
like an
beloved.
icon basically, and
Yeah.
even after Durant left, when a lot of people said like, well, Durant left because of Westbrook, he still had a lot of people that really liked him.
Yeah.
Um,
He was an amazing player.
and then I feel like, once he left Oklahoma City and, then he went to like Houston,
Yeah.
Washington, obviously LA as well. I feel like that's, when a lot more people were like, well, see, look at what happens when this guy is like, an important, the biggest
Especially
part of
on
the team.
Houston. It was really bad. And then obviously the Lakers, because
Mhm.
the dark times, am I right?
Yeah, but it is funny because I feel like once Durant left, like I said, then that's when you had people that were a lot more split on Westbrook. Because then,
Sure.
on that Oklahoma City team when he won the MVP, right? You had people who were like, "Oh, Harden should win MVP." Then you had other people who
Sure.
said, "Well, Westbrook should win MVP." And then obviously they faced each other in the first round, and the Rockets had the better team and they beat, Oklahoma City.
Absolutely.
Since yeah, and and that's the thing. It is kind of funny because I feel like, when you look at the two careers, like, you look at them and like, Westbrook, was the second best player on a team that went to the finals, with Durant. And they made a lot of they made some deep playoff runs. They
Yeah.
had a lot of injuries as well.
Yeah.
Um, you
A
know,
lot of mistakes too.
yeah, exactly. A lot of mistakes as well. And then you look at Harden and it's like, well, he got to the conference finals. He as the best player on the team, he went further than Westbrook. And
Sure.
even, was this close, to beating that Golden State team with Kevin Durant.
Yeah.
So
It
it's
was
almost like
close.
you almost feel like, maybe his ceiling was higher than Westbrook's in terms of like, he's the best player on a team, there's a world where you could potentially, like get to the finals and maybe win a
Absolutely.
championship.
I agree
But then
with
at the
that.
same time, I feel like, you might prefer to have Westbrook on the team because I think, it seems like a lot of people really do like Westbrook, the teammate. There's not as many people that don't like Westbrook, the person. You know what I mean?
I understand.
Yeah, like that's the thing. Like people say he's a great teammate.
They
But I
say that
think
everywhere he goes.
right, but yeah, exactly. But I think the issue is that like after a while, his style of play, I feel like just wears out his welcome. Like he'll wear out his welcome with his style of play. For a lot of teams, and that's why he's been moved every year. But then it's funny because then he goes to the Clippers and kind of finds himself, and neither you nor I thought that that fit was really going to work out.
Right.
Um, but he played very well for the Clippers, and now he's their starting point guard, and he could potentially be playing alongside Harden again, which is kind of like I said, reignited this conversation. So that's the funny thing is that like I said, I feel like all time Harden would probably rank higher, but I
Okay.
feel like you might prefer to have Westbrook on
I'm
your
going
team.
Westbrook, but that's just
Yeah, I feel
me.
like because again, I feel like he's just probably an easier guy like to get along with, as a teammate, right? Like because like usually when he's been moved, it's been more so like it just didn't work on the floor. Whereas like Harden, I feel like it's more so like guys just aren't getting along.
Yeah,
You
like
know?
he'll crucify your freaking team
Yeah,
chemistry. Team chemistry
right. Like
minus 50%.
yeah, because like even like at the lowest point, like with Westbrook on the Lakers, like it got pretty bad, and they obviously traded him. But you never question like like oh okay, this guy is clearly just like just completely quit. Like obviously
Right.
like wasn't doing a whole lot on the defensive end, took a lot of, wild shots, but like at the same time, like, when you watch Harden, when he's in that mode where he's just like not even trying and not even caring, like it's on another level.
And
And I just feel like
it seeps into the
yeah,
rest of the team and it's toxic.
yeah. Yeah, and I feel like you just don't normally see that, from a guy like Westbrook. So I feel like I probably would prefer to have, like a Westbrook guy on my team. But I still would probably acknowledge I feel like Harden's probably had the quote unquote better career. But then you factor in, like, they both won MVPs. They both have been on a number of good teams. But like I said, I think Westbrook would be the easier guy to get along with in terms of like which one would you rather have on your team? And again, like, I think the style of play, is very electrifying. Not that Harden's isn't. But again, it's also not for everybody, because again, there are a fair number of people who don't like either guy. You kind of made the joke. Personally, I'd rather have neither of them.
Yeah, I'd rather the conversation be about two other guys if you want me to be
Yeah,
completely
like
honest. That's what
yeah,
I would
yeah,
say.
and I feel like there's a lot of people who would say that, but at the same time, both guys have a very large fan base. Because
You're not
again, like
wrong.
we yeah, exactly. Because there's a lot of Westbrook fans. There's a lot of Harden fans. From Oklahoma City and Houston. When they grew up watching those guys and they really like them. Like
Right.
there's still a lot of people that will defend. Harden forever. Even after he's forced his way out of a number of teams and is getting ready to force his way out of another one.
Yeah.
So
Hey,
yes,
hey,
I
they can die on that hill if they want to. That's their decision.
yeah, I feel like yeah. So that's the thing. That's that. And again, like I said, it's always a fun conversation because there's
Yeah.
pros and cons. I think to both of them. Because, like I said, I feel like Harden's ceiling was higher, but I feel like Westbrook was the easier one, like, as a teammate, to play with and get along. Well, more so to get along with.
Sure.
Like,
I
again, I
agree.
haven't heard I haven't heard as many people say, like, a lot of negative things about Westbrook, the teammate.
It's the
But,
fans. It's literally only the fans.
yeah, but we know that there, are a number of guys that, because when they played, that were like, yeah, I don't really enjoy playing with Harden.
Right. Yeah. It's just a difference in play style. It is what it is.
Yeah. So now, according to Shams, Joel Embiid, he's going to play for Team USA. So we tried, so we weren't sure, which one he was going to play for. Was it France? Was it USA? But he's going to play for Team USA. So
Nice.
that's big because again, that's another really talented player that you got, on the books, for, next year's Olympics in Paris, right? Again, you got LeBron, you got Durant, you got Steph, you got Embiid. There's going to be other guys on the way. They're reportedly trying to get Drew Holiday on there as well. So I think that's going to be a really talented Team USA, roster. Again, like because we looked at the last squad that they had for the World Cup. It's going to be a different animal because again,
Yeah.
these guys are closer to the best of the best.
Pretty much, yeah. This is the Avenge team. That's kind of what I've, coined them as. They're trying to get their get back, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think this is the right group of people to do so. And it'll be
Yeah,
really cool to see, them. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm gonna assume they're gonna bring home gold. Um,
yeah,
but in terms of Embiid, I know that's kind of sparked a very interesting and very hot topic of,
yeah,
should people be playing, for their home country or should they be playing for their country of desire? And that's kind of interesting to me. I personally would say, you know, I would say go for follow your heart. So if your heart is telling you, play for your home country, okay, cool. I wouldn't be mad at Embiid if he wanted to play for, Cameroon or France. I think, either one would be a great decision for him. Um,
yeah.
but
I
I
think
think
it's
he, yeah, it was because of his son, right?
Yeah, I think he said it was based off of his son, and I think it's the citizenship that you belong to,
Right.
right? So it's like if you're an American citizen, right? Then or if you're a citizen for another country, then it depends because some players are one citizenship and then the others have like dual
Dual. Yep.
citizenship. Yeah, exactly. So yeah. Again, I'm kind of with you where it's like, you got it, you have options. And I feel like, you know, one reason, like, obviously, is like, you get to represent your country. But I feel like this one, and, maybe this one, like, is like a little bit controversial. But I feel like it's also just like in terms of the minutes. Cause it's like, if, because like, let's say like some of the guys on Team USA wouldn't be playing, if like we just got all the NBA players, to play on Team USA.
Sure.
Like if you got like Giannis and Jokic, like even though they're not American, but because they play in the NBA, like if we got all those guys, to play on, you know, the Team USA or whatever,
Hmm.
right? Then there'd be no minutes for some of the other guys, and
Sure.
that's why some of those other guys probably also will play for those teams as well because they're gonna play more. Like
Right.
a Dennis Schroeder, right?
Yeah, he wouldn't play for Team USA.
Yeah, and again, he's from Germany, but if he had like the option to play for either the USA or France, or like if he had to play for France or whatever, or Germany or some other country, right? Like he probably would mainly choose the country that he would get the most opportunity to play in, right? He
I
wouldn't
agree.
play as much as he was playing for Team USA if he had USA and German citizenship,
Yeah,
but
I get you.
as yeah, but as him playing in Germany he gets to be, one of the go-to guys, and he got the gold medal or whatever, and he got, most valuable player. So
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm hyped for the Olympics. The Olympics are always a special time, and hopefully we don't go out sad.
yeah, because 2000, or what was it? 1992 was the Dream Team,
Hmm.
and then 2008 was the Redeem Team because
Yep.
they had to take revenge for the 2004 loss.
Yeah, it was
Um,
rough.
yeah, where they lost to Argentina or whatever. I think they got bronze in Athens in 2004.
Yes.
And, now you said you call this the Avenge Team, so I
Yeah,
think
you could go avenge, revenge, anything that has something to do with avenging. I think is pretty good for this one because we need to get our get back after the World Cup. That was horrendous.
yeah. So yeah, so I agree. So finally, in the last bit of news, Peyton Pritchard for the Celtics, he was a guy that we talked about a little bit in the offseason because we weren't quite sure, what Boston was going to do with him, after the season ended, right? Like, were they going to keep him? Were they going to trade him? But, they ended up signing him to an extension. And, again, it's a relatively, inexpensive one. 4 years, 30 million. That's basically, seven and a half a year. I think that's pretty good value for a guy that's essentially a backup point guard.
Yeah,
I mean, I think he's a solid backup point guard, so I have no issues with that whatsoever. Because again, with Boston, you got a really expensive roster, but you also got a roster that has a legitimate chance to win the title. So, and again, he's a quality player. So, you might as well keep him around. And again, again, worst case scenario, you keep the asset and then you can trade him later
yeah,
um for something. But, for now, I think he, kind of fills a hole because, he's their only real backup point guard,
yeah.
because obviously the two other main guys, Holiday and White, I think they're going to be starters. I don't think they're going to have Holiday be one and then White come off the bench. I think they'll both start.
Okay, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought of that, but in terms of Peyton Pritchard. You can't really be too mad at it. Like you said, he's just your typical backup point guard, and I think every championship roster needs that guy that can come in and then, soak up some minutes and then make the most of those minutes. I think he's one of those guys. He plays with high energy, high effort. I'm not going to say, he's the best player on the floor, but, he sure does, sometimes act like it, in terms of his
Yeah,
swagger and what he does on the court. So I can't be mad at that. I don't think I know
he's not afraid.
a lot of people have been kind of mad at it, honestly. And I was like, huh? I was like, but it was
Yeah, like
mainly
what?
Boston fans. So I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, but I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he competes and he's not afraid. And I mean, like, again, on a team that's vying for a championship, you can't have guys that are afraid. So
Right.
he's more than capable and more than willing to take, a lot of big shots. Is he always going to make them? Maybe not necessarily, but he is a solid outside shooter, and I think he can fit well with those guys because he can play, kind of on and off the ball. Not necessarily on as a creator, but like I can bring up the ball, I can make the next pass to the next
Yeah.
open guy.
He can
That
relay
type of
pass.
on
Yeah.
and then off the ball because he can shoot. So I mean, I
Right.
think that's a really solid, option to put alongside, the other players for Boston when you have guys like Tatum and Brown that are more so like one-on-one, players.
Yeah. Isocentric. Yeah. I get it.
Yeah, so yeah, well that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Obviously a longer one because there's a lot to talk about. Now the season is, we're only a couple weeks away now, from opening night, with Lakers, Nuggets, Warriors, Suns. So, and again, it's going to be an exciting season. And let us know in the comments what you thought, of the hot takes. Do you agree with some of them? All right, are they hot or do you drop them?
Yeah.
Let us know because again, like it's a new segment we're going to try to do for the most part because there's a lot to talk about. And it's worth discussing. So I mean,
Yeah.
like, let us know. We continue to appreciate, the support. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on our journey, to 50 subscribers. Um, so we appreciate all that, and we'll see you Friday.